Chapter 23. The Law of Action and Reaction. Action and reaction are equal and opposite. The equivalence of the reaction renders it calculable if the ratio of the transmission be known. There are 7 subplanes in a plane, 7 planes in a universe of the 7th cosmic plane, and 7 planes in the cosmos. Transmission takes place by subplanes. The potency of each subplane is the square of the potency of the subplane below it. This, you will see, is explained by the fact that the 2 opposing and equally balanced forces set up a vortex which is the primal atom. When these 2 forces meet, they neutralize each other, and the result is a center of stability which is devoid of force save in its subjective aspects. It may be noted that a static force is the subjective aspect of a force. If, therefore, you should be able to separate the gyrating currents which form a primal atom, you would have 2 potencies which would be the equivalent of the latency of that atom, so that instead of one actual latency you have 2 potencies, so that the atom has been multiplied by itself and transferred from one plane of manifestation to another, and whenever a thing is thus multiplied it is translated to another dimension. When therefore action and reaction are said to be equal and opposite, it must be remembered that they are so in the ordinary sense in which this term is employed, and on the plane under consideration only. If, however, such conditions should occur that the force should be transmuted from a lower to a higher plane, then the reaction is in the equivalent potency of that plane. Hence it is that when you sublimate a force you square it. When you degrade a force you reduce it to its square root. The term degradation is here employed in its technical sense as the opposite of sublimation, meaning descent into matter. On the involuntary arc, degradation was the means of development. Hence it is that in the course of initiatory experiences, in which the soul recapitulates evolution, it has to know its death. Each atom of matter contains the fruits of an involution. Therefore you will see that if you could completely disintegrate the atoms of matter in 1 ounce of clay, you could shatter the globe on which you stand. But before you could perform that magical process, you would have, by the power of your will, to dissolve the cohesion of the cosmos. Therefore, it is not to be anticipated that this experiment will be successfully executed in the immediate future. Each divine spark, by the time it has reached the nadir of involution and is ready to embark upon the path of evolution, whereon it is seen to be characteristically human, possesses potentialities which you little realize. When subjective consciousness is raised from the plane of its habitual functioning to the next superior plane, it conforms to the law already enunciated, and an inertia is converted into 2 kineticisms. It is seldom that the consciousness centers of the lower plane are able to carry this force if the conversion is sudden and total. Hence the saying, "Thou canst not look upon my face and live." Hence also the fact that where a lesser or more partial form of conversion takes place, it is apprehended simply as a blinding flash of light, and when such conversion takes place in its normal form, it is performed by the method of addition instead of multiplication. That is to say, when transmutation is performed from one plane to another by the process of squaring, the result may be described in the words of Scripture. He walked with God and was not. When the process takes the form of a many times repeated multiplication, you have the ordinary course of the path, each grade of initiation being multiplication. But when you have the process as an addition, you have the normal course of evolution. Each grade of initiation can be conceived of as a blinding flash of light, and by means of this flash the image of the subplane to which it belongs is photographed on the subconsciousness, whence consciousness reads it at its leisure. If power be raised a plane, you must have a group to receive it. The form for a force raised from one plane to another is built up of the group mind. If a force is raised a second plane, you must have a second grade in your group. You therefore get a grade for each plane. If, on the other hand, force be degraded a plane, or a subplane, an entirely different process occurs. The force being rendered inert, the vehicle through which it functions is as an empty channel, Standing open, anything may fill it. This is the key to much and explains obsession. Now remember that the term obsession is popularly used inaccurately when what is technically called overshadowing is meant. Overshadowing is a controlling influence exercised by one entity over another. Obsession takes place only when the soul has been precipitated by the process of the degradation of consciousness. The term precipitation is used because the analogy is exact. When therefore a true case of obsession has to be dealt with, it is necessary not only to cast out the invading entity, but to sublimate the soul. You will see a reference to this in the story of the man with whom the devil was cast out, and in whom the 7 devils entered, finding the house empty. The degradation of the soul takes place through the operations of the lower types of evolution with which contacts have been formed. It does not take place as a result of a deliberate act of will, but rather as a result of an inhibition of will. Therefore, when you are dealing with a case in which the will functions from the inhibiting aspect rather than the kinetic aspect, you must always take care lest such a pull downward is set up. The inhibited will is more dangerous than the perverted will, because it exposes its possessor to the influence of extra-human forces. You will see, then, that the occult significance of the maxim that action and reaction are equal has 2 implications. Action and reaction are equal only on one plane, but when the functioning of 7 planes are considered, they are anything but equal. And when an action occurring on one plane has its reactions on another plane, the result is a transmutation of values. These values have already been explained to you. It will no doubt have occurred to you that when a force, being transmuted from one plane to another, exerts its influence on the second plane, and withdraws its influence from the first, an alteration of equilibrium will result. This is indeed the case, and it is therefore necessary for the adept who performs this operation to maintain the adequate equilibrium of stresses. For this purpose he must know the method of properly degrading an equivalent force. This is an exceedingly important point in practical occultism, and concerns the utilization of reverse aspects in their proper compensating potencies. The Sephiroth, when reversed, are the Quiliphoth. Therein is the key to much, and therefore it is that in every magical operation in which the great spiritual potencies are invoked, lesser entities are also employed in their proper aspects, and what you would term a master wishes to operate on the physical plane, he will of necessary employ an entity of a lower grade of evolution than his own, and he will be compelled to work through the personality of that person. In order to restore the equilibrium which he is about to displace, he will then, metaphorically speaking, employ that entity as the nadir of his arc. The force he transmits will be received by the higher aspect of that entity, and will be expressed by the lowest and most concrete aspect of the individuality of that entity, and the personality will be used for the return flow from the physical plane. This would be expressed in diagrammatic form by the letter Y, of which the 2 arms should represent the individuality and personality, and the basal portion the channel of outflowing and inflowing of the physical plane. Upon the Y, superimpose an X, and you will get the symbol of the outflowing and inflowing forces, the X being formed of 2 C's back to back, the left hand being marked with an arrow of outflowing and the right hand with an arrow of inflowing. You will now perceive why continence is often demanded when operation of practical magic are in progress. The return flow having to take place through the personality in its lowest and most primitive aspect, that aspect has to be upturned, so that the force of its expression may return to God who gave it. This is but another way of expressing the use of sublimation for the purpose of generating force in the upper planes. The pupil who receives force from his master on the higher plane for the purpose of transmission to the physical plane must be prepared to effect the transmutation of the corresponding amount of force in his own nature from a lower plane to the higher in order to preserve the necessary balance. It is the neglect of this operation which causes the all too frequent overweighing of the lower aspects of the occultist. Chapter 24, The Law of Limitation, Part 1. Limitation is the first law of manifestation. Therefore, it is the first law of power. This is not sufficiently appreciated. Many people believe that a spiritual power is infinite, which is far from being the case. For the Logos to manifest, it has to circumscribe itself. But a spiritual power is so much greater than the potencies of the lower planes that when brought to bear upon them, it overcomes all resistance. In order to bring any energy into manifestation, it is necessary to provide it with a form or vehicle. The form is built into the substance of the plane immediately superior to that upon which it is desired to produce an effect, and through this channel is directed the force it is desired to invoke. To invoke a force without directing it is to disperse it. It is only by knowledge and utilization of the law of limitation that power can be conserved. In order to achieve an end, you must outline that end and limit yourself to it, rejecting all that is irrelevant, and note this point. The first process in the invocation of power is the rejection of that which is irrelevant. This is another name for concentration. The law of limitation means the concentration of power by the rejection of the irrelevant. This is not sufficiently understood. In all undertaking, the prime requisite for success is to know what you cannot do. This is discrimination. The law of limitation is a necessary corollary of the laws governing the invocation of power. When it is desired to put through an enterprise, first proceed to think the matter out in all details, clearly outline the end it is designed to achieve. Next, consider the means whereby that end may be achieved. Next, proceed to eliminate all desire for anything unconnected with that aim. This is the most important detail. In other words, you render yourself one-pointed. It may well be that in doing this you put aside certain legitimate human aims. Put them aside with a proviso that in due season their claims will be considered, and then proceed with utter ruthlessness to limit yourself to the matter in hand, so that you have but one desire and all else is subordinate to it. Think of nothing else, dream of nothing else, until the matter is finished. Then, having achieved this complete circumscription of desire and limitation of the content of consciousness, invoke the power for its performance, and in a flash the thing will be done. Thorough preparation means quick completion. In these matters, insufficient time is usually given to the preparation, and therefore the achievement is incomplete. It is your intention to invoke spiritual potencies, you must prepare for them by the complete dedication of the content of consciousness. It must not be forgotten, however, that such a narrowing of consciousness would destroy the balance of the nature if persisted in unduly. Therefore learn to alternate periods of concentration with periods of expansion into fullness of life, so that the broadened consciousness and developed character act as a background for the intensification and limitation of desire which brings spiritual potencies into manifestation on the physical plane. It is a lack of this proportion which leads to fanaticism and a loss of balance. It is by the limitation of the content of consciousness that you achieve the concentration of power, but it is by the development and expansion of consciousness that you achieve the basis of limitation. Because limitation implies discrimination, and a limitation of consciousness is entirely different from a limited consciousness. Limited consciousness implies the exclusion of experience. Limitation of consciousness implies selection of experience and the focusing of attention upon the chosen subject. It is the law of limitation which is implied in the power to focus. It is by availing ourselves of resistance that we are able to obtain a purchase upon diffused manifestation. The greater part of the resistance experienced by the neophyte in his attempt to practice the occult arts is the resistance of inertia. In order to set in motion that which is inert, it is necessary for the ego to obtain a purchase upon a similar resistance. Inertia is then balanced against inertia, and the kineticism of the ego avails to turn the balance. In this way, results may be achieved that the unaided will and could not obtain. It is necessary that those in the service of the hierarchy should acquire a knowledge of the magical arts, because these enable you to invoke and concentrate power effectively. It is the use of those arts for evil ends which is forbidden, but the use of them under the law is an economy of energy. Remember, then, that in all undertaking, limitation is the secret of power. This does not imply, however, that you should always seek to achieve small things. Always correlate your effort with the cosmos itself, and see your work in relation to the whole. But rigidly circumscribe the section of that cosmos whole which you take into your hands. To weigh yourself in the scale against that which is greater than yourself is to be outweighed by the inertia of the mass, but to circumscribe a section of the mass, and separate it from the whole is to enable yourself to achieve piecemeal that which you cannot achieve in bulk. In making this circumscription, look for the natural lines of cleavage. Seek the joints of the problem. In all affairs there will always be points where matters can be segregated, and other points that will resist partition. Look for these on the astral plane among the emotions evolved in the matter. The scheme as a whole may be envisaged as one on the mental plane, but upon the astral plane the lines of cleavage may be seen. The object of immediate desire may be distinguished from the object of remote desire. The object which is desired by one aspect of a complex nature may be distinguished from the object which is desired by another aspect. If you yourself circumscribe consciousness to a single point, it will be brought to such a fine edge that it will be inserted along the lines of cleavage of an uncircumscribed enterprise and deal with that enterprise piecemeal. It is the focus of consciousness which enables power to be brought to bear and work to be accomplished with that power. But it is the extension of consciousness that provides a necessary base upon which the force obtains a purchase. The concentration at the apex must be supplemented by breadth at the base, and this is a point which is often forgotten. Chapter 25, The Law of Limitation, Part 2. The law of limitation is the basis of occult practice. It is a secret of power. Therefore it was withheld from those on the probationary path. They were taught of the existence of an infinite reservoir of power, and to meditate therein. They were taught to meditate on the formless power. This enabled the power to use them, not them to use the power. But when the knowledge is acquired of the method of channeling building through the lower plane, it is possible to direct power to any given end. When this is accomplished, power is translated from the planes of the individuality to the planes of the personality, not within the organism, but without. It is therefore necessary to have the knowledge of the method of making forms, as above, so below. When the unmanifest willed to become manifest, motion flowed in a circle, returning whence it originated. To make a form upon the concrete mental plane, thought must move in a circle, returning whence it originated. Starting with a concept, it must proceed logically from that concept, reasoning from the general to the particular upon the outgoing arc, and from the particular to the general on the arc of returning, thus envisaging both sides of the question and correlating them. This is the first stage. The concept thus formed should then be transferred to the realm of feeling. This corresponds to the ring pass not. The concept should then be subjected to the driving force of the nature. This corresponds to the ring chaos. Now the ring cosmos is the concept of the mental plane. The ring chaos is the driving force of the instincts, and the ring pass not corresponds to the upper astral aspect. By meditating on these correspondence you will learn much. This is your archetypical form, and within it will build up all the actions and reactions arising in relation to the matter at hand. But this matter must always first be circumscribed by the clear definition of consciousness. The second reaction of consciousness arises with regard to the desire relating thereto, and the third aspect concerns the use of the primitive force for the generation of power. The cosmic aspect of the concept having thus been set up, manifestation in the world of form takes place within the circumscribed sphere. Without this circumscription, there is no manifestation. The prime law of the involuntary arc is the law of limitation. The prime law of the evolutionary arc is the law of the 7 deaths. The law of limitation has for its basis the law of action and reaction. The law of action and reaction has for its basis the phenomena connected with the curve. The curve sufficiently prolonged becomes a circle. A segment of a curve is an arc. The pendulum is a type of action and reaction equal and opposite. Prolong the arc described by the pendulum and you will form a circle, of which the length of the pendulum is the radius. This explains much in relation to the transmutation of force from plane to plane. Incarnation is based upon the law of limitation, karma on the law of action and reaction, and because it is only in a limited sphere that equal and opposite action and reaction can take place. Force has to be manifested as form. so that the fruits of its action may be returned again to the sphere whence it originated. The building of a vehicle for incarnation follows the lines already laid down. Again, we have the circumscribing which delimits the matter to be worked out in that incarnation. Each soul determines its own matter. The Oversoul, therefore, is the Lord of Karma to each one. It is this you invoke in all matters connected with your fate. You invoke your own essential self. The law of limitation is analogous to the mathematical concept concerning measurements of surfaces. It has a two-dimensional aspect. It is by the introduction of a third dimension that we transcend the law of limitation, and man, having a consciousness of three dimensions, can use the law of limitation by transcending it. Upon whatever plane the law of limitation acts, it can always be transcended by the addition of a dimension to consciousness. This is the secret of the control of the law of limitation. The law of limitation gives the means of calculating the conditions under which an operation has to be carried out. If you do not determine these conditions, you are controlled by these conditions. But if you can raise consciousness to the plane which can perceive them as a synthesis, if you can perceive the abstraction which comprises them, and then can delimit the abstraction, and consider it in relationship to the condition of its plane apart from the law of limitation, if you can conceive it in relation to the cosmos, having in conception linked the idea to the cosmos by envisaging the relationship between the whole and the part, it is then possible for consciousness, bearing this cosmic idea in mind, to be redirected to the finite aspect of that idea, and then to approach it from another and superior dimension, and while utilizing the law of limitation to circumscribe the matter in hand, to transcend these limitations. This method can be applied not only to the handling of any matter of affair, but also to the building of the bodies in an incarnation, and to the handling of karma during incarnation. For do we but once see our predestined fate in our relationship to cosmic law, we have mastered our fate. The essential self always sees it thus, because the essential self has a cosmic relationship by means of the logoidal imprints of the divine sparks. But the lower self, having a terrestrial relationship, sees all things in relationship to birth and death, beginning and ending. So long as consciousness dwells in the senses, it will view things from the standpoint of the senses, of pain and pleasure, beginning and ending. But when it is raised to the relation of cosmic things, it will see all things in relation to evolution, to the curve that comes round the whole circle, not to the straight line of the partition of finiteness. The personality is what it is by virtue of the law of limitation. The individuality is what it is by virtue of the laws of the nature of the cosmos. And the ladder, from the personality to the individual, has 7 rungs, and these rungs are the 7 death. For it is the law of limitation that brings to birth, but it is the law of death that brings to life. For birth is death, and death is birth. All are born blind, which mercifully prevents them from knowing that they are dead. You do not realize that your plane is the plane of death, and that our plane is the plane of life. Those who are in a matter in the grave, they are dead and buried. Death and initiation produce the same results. Therefore, it is all initiation contains a symbolism of death and burial. Always remember that upon the material plane, death and loss mean freedom and resurrection. Possessions are as the earth that is heaped upon the corpse. Learn, therefore, to look down upon your dead bodies, and to galvanize them with your life, but do not make the mistake of living in them. It is very useful to be able to project consciousness onto the mundane sphere, but it is very disadvantageous to be fettered by the conditions of that sphere. You are held to that sphere by 2 things, fear and desire. Initiation will enable you to live upon our plane, though still attached to brain consciousness. It is therefore that the degrees teach, first, the overcoming of desire, secondly, the overcoming of fear, and thirdly, death and resurrection. By knowing the law of limitation and transcending it, you can use it. Having circumscribed the task you have set yourself, see it in relation to the cosmos. By seeing the cosmic archetype, you will draw in the force of that ideal, and by seeing the circumscribed form which it is desired to manifest, you will focus that force. End of chapter.